This court is satisfied that Charles Stuart is guilty of levying war against Parliament and the people, for all which treasons and crimes this court doth adjudge that he, as a tyrant, traitor, murderer, and public enemy to the good people of this nation, shall be put to death by the severing of his head from his body. To his accusers, Charles Stuart, King Charles I, was a man of blood. He was responsible for the terrible civil war which had engulfed his three kingdoms, resulting in 180,000 casualties in England alone, killing a higher proportion of men than would be killed during the First World War. Yet soon after Charles was executed, handkerchiefs stained with his blood were reportedly causing miracles, and a book of the king's last prayers became a national bestseller. At the time of the restoration of the monarchy in 1660, the church declared Charles to be a martyr. Which was it? Was Charles a murderer or a martyr? Mark Kishlansky writes that Charles is the most despised monarch in Britain's historical memory. To his critics, at the time and since, he was a petty tyrant, determined to create an absolute monarchy in the French or Spanish style. But, lacking political intelligence, charisma, or skill, he was incapable of realizing his vision. G.M. Trevelyan called him stupid and selfish. L.G. Reeve concluded that Charles was a bad ruler because he was a weak man. As Graham Goodlett explains, Charles expected his wishes to be accepted without a need for discussion, and viewed criticism as a mark of disloyalty that needed to be confronted and crushed. This, coupled with a strongly felt sense of personal honor, led him to personalize issues in an unhelpful way, so that he approached negotiations without a genuine desire to comprehend or resolve the grievances of the other side. However, this view has not been without its challenges. Kevin Sharp's detailed study of the 1630s, when Charles ruled without Parliament, reveals a conscientious king working with his ministers to implement reform, and Kishlansky reminds us that Charles had many characteristics which made him an ideal monarch. He promoted the arts and led a refined court. He was a devoted husband and father, was religious, and wanted to make England a great European power. Leander de Lisle describes Charles as a brave and radical king who deserves respect and understanding. Was Charles then simply confronted by circumstances which would have got the better of any king or queen? It is true that Charles faced significant challenges, perhaps none greater than attempting to govern three still very separate kingdoms, each with different social structures, legal traditions, and most importantly, religious practices. Charles's desire to create a uniform religion across his three kingdoms was not unusual, but proved disastrous in practice. Charles was also not unique among his fellow rulers in wishing to project the prestige of kingship or to engage in expensive wars, but the nature of the English constitution, which had limited tax-raising powers to Parliament, made this particularly difficult. As de Lisle explains, Charles never really understood the significance of Parliament in English culture, nor was he able to accept the compromises and slights to his regal authority that the messy business of politics sometimes required. These proved fatal for the king and hundreds of thousands of his subjects in England, Scotland, and Ireland. Despite coming to the throne on a wave of popular enthusiasm, within 5 years Charles presided over the complete collapse of the relationship between the Crown and Parliament. During the personal rule that followed, it was the king's attempts to raise money without Parliament's agreement and impose William Laud's religious reforms which alienated large parts of the political community. It was Charles's heavy-handed attempts to then impose this religious program on the Scots that provoked rebellion, requiring him to finally summon Parliament in 1640, and then, rather than compromise with Parliament, which was understandably slighted by its absence of 11 years, Charles recklessly attempted to arrest 5 of its most outspoken critics of his policies. As Goodlett explains, this achieved the worst of both possible worlds. His willingness to use force against MPs outraged the political community, while his failure to capture his targets and having to leave London as opinion turned violently against him was a public humiliation. Charles proved no more effective as a war leader, and then failed to take seriously various peace proposals which would have allowed him to retain the throne, albeit with reduced powers. Instead, his attempts to play his opponents off against one another left his enemies with little choice and every excuse to remove him permanently from the political scene. Charles was neither the murderer of black parliamentary propaganda or the martyr of later Restoration imagination. But at each test of his reign, Charles allowed his personal sense of honour and royal entitlement to outweigh the political need for compromise that could have saved his throne and his head.